is devoted to how to make a map. And these are maps that we use at Smart History that may be useful in the classroom. There are lots of different ways to do this, but we're going to walk you through our method. Before we begin, I just want to call out some really terrific resources for finding historical maps. These are some of the most extraordinary collections. I want to especially call out the David Rumsey Map Collection and the Rumsey Map Center at Stanford University, but the map collection is especially extraordinary and just really rich collection. If you haven't explored it and you like maps, it's a great place to go. And as you'll see in our discussion, finding historical maps is actually an important part of the process. Okay, so I'm putting up here 4 different maps that we've used on Smart History for essays, for videos. The map on the upper left is the map that we'll actually be producing today together that we'll walk through. And as you can see, it calls out the Republic of Florence, the Republic of Siena, the capitals of those city-states, and uses as an underlying image Google Earth, which actually all 4 of these do. The map on the upper right was produced specifically for our series of books, and we wanted to call out the proximity of art centers, especially near Tuscany, in Tuscany. The map on the lower left is a little bit different again. You'll see that there are no borders, and this was purposeful because this was made for a video that was looking at a Safavid object, and we were talking about the fluidity of borders, and the purpose of this map was different. It was simply to show the Safavids in between the Ottomans to the west and the Mughal Empire to the east. And so all of these maps are very, I think, defined. They're very much trying to provide only specific kinds of information. The map on the lower right is different again. Here we do have a hard border, and what we've done is we've created a kind of scrim to differentiate the Roman Empire at its greatest extent in 117 CE. So 4 different kinds of maps for 4 different purposes. Okay. We'll just go ahead. We're going to go through a 5-step process. We're going to grab a base image and clean it up. And you can see on the left, an image straight off of Google, and on the right, that cleaned up Google Earth view. We're going to correlate it with a historical map. In this case, this is a map from 1911 that we'll actually use in our process. We're going to use that to actually kind of trace the borders of the republics that we're interested in here, in this case, Florence and Siena. And we're going to be doing this with some Photoshop functionality that allows us to adjust the opacity and to create layers. And then we'll finally just put a little shadow behind the letters to increase the legibility. And so that's a 5-step process: cleaning up the base image, correlating it with a historical map, adding the regions and the cities, increasing the legibility, and then finishing touches, in this case, just this little legend here, Florence and Siena circa 1494. So let's get going. In order to do this, I'm going to share my dirty laundry here for a second and unshare my screen so that I can share Photoshop. See if I can share my Photoshop. Here we go. Okay. I should mention that we're going to take questions and answers afterwards, and please use the Q&A section of the webinar, not the regular commenting area, and we'll get to your questions right after I finish. Okay. Now this is when I was talking to Beth about this this process and what I was going to be demonstrating, she had a great analogy. This is a little bit like a cooking show where they cheat, where they have the beautiful pie or cake in the oven, and then they just show show the person mixing in the bowl, and somehow it becomes this beautiful thing. So I actually have the entire map produced here, and we're going to reverse engineer this a little bit and show how this was constructed. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to unshare my screen again. I'm going to share my entire desktop now, and I'm going to go to Google uh, and I've found Italy. Now, I've made a couple of decisions here that I just want you to be aware of before I begin. I've not zoomed in too much, even though I'm focusing on Florence and Siena. I thought it was important for my students that I actually show the entirety or nearly the entirety of the boot of Italy, because that's such a recognizable geographic marker so that they know where they are. I think if I zoomed in too much, they would lose that geographic sense of where they are. So it's a bit of a compromise. I want to do a couple of things now. I want to switch over to Google Satellite, to Google Earth, and I'm going to do that by clicking here. But there's too much information here, and this is going to be distracting for my students. So I don't want the roads, I don't want Arezzo, and I certainly don't want this panel. So I'm going to just go over here and turn the labels off. And that's cleaned this image up considerably. I'm going to then just close this panel, and I'm going to take a screenshot by hitting Shift, Command, and 4 simultaneously. That'll give me crosshairs, and I can drag across and get what I want. Now, one of the things that I do want to make sure I always get is the information down in the lower right corner. In this case, it says Imagery Copyright 2020 Terametrics, and that copyright information is essential if you're going to use a Google map. Google also wants you not to obscure their logo, and so that's the deal we're making. I'm going to use their map, but I'm going to make sure that I've included that that material so that everybody is happy. Okay. Now, once I've got that, I'm going to just stop this screen share and go back to, and apologize for the jumping around, go back to Photoshop. And what I've done is I'm just going to turn off all of these layers now for just a sec. Is I've brought this into Photoshop. And so this is that same image. And now I want to sort of understand where to put Florence and Siena. Now you might ask, why don't I just use a historical map? And I've actually dug up a historical map that is useful for me, or a map that speaks of a historical moment at least. And I could show this to my students, but I find that there's too much information here. My students are not interested at the moment in the Visconti. They're not interested in the Ottoman Empire. The Adriatic Sea it's just simply too much information. So really what I want is just this information, but even that area is too dense. And so I'm going to create my own map that displays only the information that I want. Now, what I've done is I've created a series of layers. I've brought this historical, or this atlas map in, and I've also brought in my base map. And the base map is a layer just on top. And this allows me to do a couple of things that are important. I'm going to use this opacity function, which is right here, to decrease the opacity of the image that's on top, so that I can actually see through it and see both images simultaneously. And what I've done on my own, and this is a little bit the cooking show analogy, is I've sized the two so that they're the same. And I've actually turned the historical map a little bit so that it aligns fairly well. And so you can see that the coast that I'm interested in here by the Republic of Florence and Siena is actually right on. Both maps are quite accurate, and it matched up perfectly. However, when we get over to the Adriatic coast, you can see that the alignment is not so good, and it gets even worse as we get down to the heel of the Italian peninsula. And so, but that's okay. I'm not worried about that. I'm interested in this area right here. And so I think you can see right off the bat that what we're doing is no more complicated really than what you did in elementary school when you took a piece of tracing paper and began to copy something. And that's all we're going to do. I'm going to create a brand new layer for everything I want on this map. And in essence, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to produce these two layers. But let me do that from scratch, just so you can see how it's done. The way I create a new layer is I press this little plus sign that's within a square, and that's created a new layer. And I'm going to now make sure that that's selected. And I'm going to just use my brush tool here. I'm going to choose a color that will read against this. Let me use this turquoise here. Choose my brush, and I might zoom in a bit. And I'm just going to simply begin to color this in. Now, I'm not going to take your time and do this with you sitting there, but let that little spot suffice. I'll create another layer. Let me choose another color, maybe pink this time for sienna, and I'll abut that as well. And I would do this obviously much more carefully on my own. Now, let me now get rid of these, whoops, let me get rid of these two new layers that I've just produced that were sort of mock-ups, and go to the proper layers that I was a little bit more careful about. Oops. Here we go. And when actually, let me do these one at a time. When I first produced them, this is what they looked like. That is, they were completely opaque. And if I back off the underlying historical map by increasing the opacity of the Google map, this is where we are. And certainly you can see very clearly where Florence and Siena are, but it's where the republics are. But it is, I think, to my eye, at least too garish. And I would like to see some of the topography underneath. And so I'm going to use the tools that we had used previously, that is the opacity, to just back off, a bit so that they become a little bit more transparent and I can see under them. You can also fuss with the fill underneath, which can actually have very nice results. But now that looks to my eye like it belongs much more to the map underneath it. And so I'm quite pleased with that. The next thing I'm going to want to do is decrease the opacity of the Google map one more time, because I want to make sure I can see where the actual capital cities are. And so if I do that, I can look here and I can just make out that Florence, the city of Florence is here and the city of Siena is here. And I want to mark those off. So I'm going to create a layer to do that. And I'm going to make sure that that layer is actually on top of the regions that I've created. I'll go over to my marquee tool here, and the marquee tool is often a rectangle, but if you press down on it, you can choose the elliptical, which is what you want. And I'm then going to just click and drag while I hold my finger on the shift key, and that will make sure that I get a perfect circle. Now it's going to be a little bit hard for you to see this, but I've created a little sort of marching ants that are a circle right over where I want it. And I'm going to make sure that white is chosen by just clicking there once, and then Option Delete, and that's become a solid white. And now I want to drop those marching ants, which you can do with Command D to drop the ants. And there's the city of Siena. And I would repeat that for the city of Florence. But I'm going to once again get rid of this and just reveal the dots that I've already produced that are in exactly the right place. Okay, so I'm happy with what I'm seeing here so far, but now I need to call them out. And so I need to add yet another set of layers that have the titles of the city-states. And so I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to put it on top of my regions again. And now I'll go over to my text and my little text tool over here on the left column. I'll bring it over here and I'm just going to type, I'm going to replace lorem ipsum with the words Florence. Generally, when we make a map, we try to be consistent. We try to use upper and lowercase for cities and for perhaps seas, and use uppercase only for countries. And of course, because Florence is an independent republic, this is a little bit of a tricky issue. And so you might want to choose uppercase in this case. Once I've got that, I can go to my pointer tool and I can place it where I want. I'm going to once again jump ahead and I'm just going to reveal now the text boxes or the text layers that I've already produced. And I want to talk about this for just a moment. I've decided not to stack Republic of Florence over the Republic of Siena. They would be very close together, and I think it would be a little bit difficult to read. And I often find that staggering the names can be very effective, especially when they're close together in a case like this. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing now. I want to go back to my Google layer and increase the opacity to 100% so that the historical map vanishes. And so I can really look at this and make sure that I'm pleased with everything. It's looking good. There is one more step that I want to take here, though, which is because especially the Republic of Siena is reading over the pink and the turquoise and this dark green, it's a little bit hard to see. So what I think would help is if I put a different layer below this and below the text, a kind of shadow to make that text pop. And so that's pretty easy to do. I'm going to create a layer. I'm going to make sure that it's under the letters, but over the regions. And then I'll go over to my brush tool. I want black in this case. And I'm going to place the circle for my brush just over the letters. And I'm going to hold down Shift so I get a straight line going across. I'll do that again for Florence. And I'm going to include that little circle. We'll do that here as well. And obviously it's reading very clearly now, but it looks terrible, at least to my eye. And so what I want to do is I want to back off on the opacity again here until it almost vanishes. But it will still really, I think, help with the readability of this. And so I'm going to just turn this on and off so you can see the difference. So that's without the shadow, and that's with the shadow. The shadow is almost not noticeable, but I think it really does help those letters to pop. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to replace it now with the shadows that I produced that are really almost invisible. But again, without them, it doesn't read as well, at least to my eye. Okay, and then lastly, I think the thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that this map is set in time. These are the borders for these republics at the end of the 15th century. And so I would build myself just a little white rectangle. Where did I put this? A little white field here and put some letters on top of it there. And voila. This is a map that I would use in my class. I hope that was helpful. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have, and I hope you build maps that are clear and efficient for your students and share them broadly. Thanks so much.
Let's see, I'm popping in to help facilitate the questions, and it looks like we had someone who raised their hand, and maybe since it went by very quickly, you could either unmute yourself or you could ask the question in the Q&A for people who want to see the questions also. Let's see, the raise hand goes by so quickly that by the time I go to unmute you, I forget who it was.
Oh, while people are gathering, I should just mention that although I used Photoshop, there are lots of different programs you can use to produce maps. You can use Pixelmator, you can use any of the photo editing tools are perfectly up to the task. I happen to be comfortable in Photoshop, so that's what I use.
And it looks like that was our first question, free alternatives.
Yes.
And I will just also mention, to piggyback off what Stephen said, if you want to learn more about some of the free alternatives and just how to work in Photoshop, Stephen also ran a wonderful workshop a few weeks ago about improving your images. That's available up on the website.
The other
Stephen,
thing
it looks like we have, someone was asking about whether you thought this could be used in PowerPoint, if you could do something like this in PowerPoint.
you could absolutely show this in PowerPoint, which is in fact what I did just a moment ago, or at least Google Image or Google Slides. I'm not sure that you could build this in PowerPoint, but you could certainly display it easily in PowerPoint. I also wanted to make the point that the tools that we just went over, although this was for map making, you can use these same tools, really just the opacity, the brush, the type, to produce any kind of annotation. If you want to diagram an image for your students, for example, all of these same tools would be perfectly useful for such a for that kind of project.
And it looks like maybe we could point out again where we could find good historical maps.
Absolutely. Okay, so let me stop sharing this. And let me see if I can find my little PowerPoint again. Bear with me for 1 sec. I have too many things open. Okay, here we go. Okay, so these are just some of my favorite places to let me just get back there. These are some of my favorite resources. Again, just a call out to David Rumsey's map collection. So David Rumsey is an avid map collector who's really tried to give back and digitized at a very high resolution a number of his maps. He also has this wonderful the wonderful ability in many of his historical maps to overlay them accurately over contemporary maps. And it's just a wonderful resource that you should definitely explore. Just Google David Rumsey map collection and you'll find it, or you can go to the map center at the library at Stanford University, but that's a different site. The New York Public Library's map division is amazing. It's one of the world's great map collections as well. The Library of Congress is amazing. Gallica, the Bibliothèque Nationale has an extraordinary array as well. Europeana has great maps. And then there's an old website, an old online website, which is still really good, which is simply called Old Maps Online. And it not only has an amazing collection of high resolution old maps, but it also, and can you tell I love maps, but it also allows you again to justify them and to contemporary maps, which can be a really wonderful and useful tool. The US Geologic Survey not only is actively mapping the world, but they also make historical maps available, and it's a really rich resource. You have to dig a little bit. It's a government website, so it's a little bit of a mess, honestly, but when you get in there, there's incredible resources. And then I put this very consciously at the end of the list, Google, still a good place to look.
That's great. It looks like we have a question about your thoughts on animating map regions to appear one by one.
Oh, sure, absolutely. And that would be a very easy thing to do with layers. You could absolutely animate that in a video context, and you could even do that in PowerPoint. And because you're building each component of your map layer by layer, you have complete control over that. And in fact, that's the way we produce many of our annotations and graphics on Smart History. Just as an aside, we're in the middle of producing a video on Gloucester Cathedral. And Gloucester Cathedral has this amazing vaulting that is wildly complex. And so we took on the ridiculous task of trying to actually isolate the different vaulting types. And we did that with different colors in Photoshop as layer types. And we do, in a sense, animate that in our video so that they come up one by one with annotations describing them, and of course the voiceover as well. So yes, absolutely. I think that the layering process gives you the control that you need to be able to do that kind of animation. That's a great idea.
Yeah. And also I'll just pop in to say that in a recent map that we made for an essay on the Mexican-American War, we use the Night Lab Juxtapose, which is a free software where you can basically put in 2 images. It doesn't have to be maps, but it essentially allows you to embed it, and you can slide over and see, how the images, in this case, maybe a map, changes over time. It looks like we don't have any other questions unless there's some final ones right at the end here.
I think that's okay because we're just about out of time.
It's true.
I want to thank everybody, and I want to really just invite everybody to come join us on, here it is, on January 6th, January 21st, and every 2 weeks thereafter. This is going to be a great series, and we'd love to see you there. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful holiday, and I think we're all looking forward to 2021.
Sounds good. And we'll put some of those resources online.